Hi everyone, I'm Lucas Berry for White Oak Rail. Well, I'm back home in West Virginia now, but in the last part of June into the early part of July, my family and I had a chance to go out to the Midwest, out into Oklahoma, Kansas, stuff like that. And while it wasn't necessarily a rail fan trip, I did get a chance to see some cool things that I, as a rail fan, really appreciated. So come along and let's see what I got. Now, the first thing I got was actually something I did not anticipate getting. It's a 7-second clip of a streetcar in downtown Cincinnati, Ohio. I had no idea that Cincinnati even had streetcars. I really was completely shocked to find out they did. But we rolled into downtown and I saw a rail in the middle of the street, and I figured, well, I have a pretty good idea what that means. So I filmed it while we were on our way to a baseball game. We were walking down to the ballpark, and I decided it would be fun to film it. Saw it coming into a stop and filmed it for a little bit. It's only 7 seconds long, but it's still pretty cool if you ask me. And after the ball game, we stayed in Cincinnati overnight. And then the next day we went out to the National Museum of Transportation in St. Louis. Actually, it's in Kirkwood, Missouri, but it may as well be in St. Louis. It was a really cool experience, and I highly recommend, if you're ever out that way, to take it in. It's really a cool place for rail fans. They've got a big boy, they've got a canal, they've got a bunch of other cool stuff. I really cannot state how much I recommend it if you're ever in town. Let's check out what I got there. Now, the first thing everyone wants to see when they come here is Big Boy number 4006, and I was no exception. We'll get back to him in a little bit. For now, let's look at some of the other stuff in the museum's collection. This is U.S. Army number 1149. It's here because it is the first successful example of a gas turbine mechanical locomotive. It's powered by two Boeing 150 horsepower jet engines. Talk about cool. It was built in 1952 by the Davenport Corporation. Really cool to see it on display. Now, this is a locomotive that really shouldn't be here. Allow me to explain. This is Norfolk & Western Y6B number 2156. She is part of what rail fans call the N&W's Big Three, along with J-Class number 611 and Class A number 1218. All were built by the N&W in Roanoke, and for a while all were reunited there. 2156 was brought back to the museum here after being on loan to the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke, just mere blocks from where she was built. After the loan was up, Norfolk Southern towed her back to Kirkwood, and she's just sitting alone. I, along with many others, believe the museum should have reached an agreement to keep her in Roanoke. Not many people realize that New York Central ran into West Virginia, in fact not far from where I live, so it was really cool for me to see NYC steam. Add to that the fact that the Central wasn't very generous with their steam locomotives, and you get a really special occasion seeing a Mohawk-type locomotive like 2933 here. Now we get some diesel action with Erie Lackawanna number 3607. This is an EMD SD45 that was built in June of 1967. And I can't find any information about when it was retired, but I'm going to assume she served very well. I think this tender might give away what we'll be seeing next. That's right, it's big boy time. We won't just be showing you what this behemoth looks like from the outside. No, we're climbing inside the cab for a look at where the action is. Unfortunately, I wasn't thinking that a quick shot as opposed to one that actually allowed me to narrate. So you'll just have to appreciate it quickly or pause the video for some thought. Now we'll take a look inside the belly of this beast. This is the firebox on number 4006. Just imagine how hot it got in there and how much coal had to be burned to keep this thing moving. Thank goodness for stokers. There's no way anyone could hand fire a big boy. And that gray part is the firebox on the outside. It's massive, isn't it? You can really see just how big this boy is. I'm standing beside the front cylinder on the fireman's side, and just look how far back it is to the cab. You can also see very clearly how Big Boy is basically two locomotives under one boiler, with two sets of 8 driving wheels and a lot of power going to each one. If there was ever an example of brute strength, it's the Big Boys. I have to say it was one of the coolest things ever in my life to climb in the cab of a Big Boy. If only I had some compressed air to put in the whistle, I'd have let everyone know I was there. Let's move on while I think about how cool that would have been. Now we move on from something everyone comes here for to something that only means a lot to some. This is Chesapeake and Ohio Canal number 2727. It was built in 1943 by the American Locomotive Company and is my favorite type of steam locomotive. That's what made it really cool for me to see it in person. I really wanted to climb in that cab and imagine myself rolling down the river with a coal train in tow. Okay, we better keep going before I started daydreaming. What really made this particular time special for me was seeing the words Chesapeake and Ohio written on the tender. The only other canal I've seen is number 2756 in Newport News, Virginia, and it wasn't lettered at that time. Seeing those words on the tender and the sand dome really brought the locomotive to life for me. It felt like I was connecting to the railroad in some way I hadn't before. It was truly a surreal experience. Moving on to something designed to run steam locomotives off the rails. This is the GM diesel that did it. It was a locomotive GM used to display the benefits of using diesel power starting in the 1930s, and as we all know, the industry made the conversion and steam locomotives were relegated to museums and parks. And this is what a diesel engine looks like. Pretty cool, huh? It was in a Union Pacific engine that had the outside cut away so you could see the inside. Really cool. Some steam locomotives were lucky enough to have second careers in excursion service. This is one of the most beloved, Frisco number 1522. Unfortunately, she hasn't seen any service since 2002. She is the only mountain-type locomotive to have an excursion career in the U.S. I, for one, would love to see her back on the high iron. This is one locomotive I am fairly certain will not be hitting the main line anytime soon. This is the Daniel Nason. Built in 1858 for the Boston and Providence Railroad, it's the oldest locomotive here and one of the oldest in the country. It's amazing to think how railroads progressed from locomotives like these to the canals and big boys. Speaking of development, this is a really cool example of diesel locomotive development, the Union Pacific Centennial. It's basically two diesel engines on one frame, and it's massive. They just say Union Pacific liked a lot of power on their trains. Union Pacific also liked big machinery such as this snowplow. Now this is how they clear snow off a railroad. I wonder if I can get one like it from my driveway. While I was at the museum, I met these fine folks, and I asked them what their favorite thing was, and I got a very interesting response.
I liked the rainbow train. It's really pretty, and everything here is really unique. It's really interesting.
The rainbow train she was talking about is Georgia Railroad number 724. Built by the Boltwood Locomotive Works in 1896, it's painted this way to illustrate the parts of a steam locomotive to visitors. I had no idea about that when I saw it, but I really liked the reasoning. In our last video, we saw two CN units pulling a molten sulfur train in Hinton. Here's another CN locomotive that predates those by just a little. This locomotive was built by the Montreal Locomotive Works, although not for Canadian National. It was originally built for the Intercolonial Railway in 1905. The Intercolonial became part of the Canadian National in 1918. Number 5529 had a long career though, serving into the 1950s, and she's been at the museum since 1959. Now, I didn't know this until I watched a video by K&L Trains on the 20th Century Limited. But steam locomotives were not allowed in New York's Grand Central Terminal, so the Central had to find a way around that. This is one of those ways. New York Central number 113 is an S2 class electric locomotive built in 1906. It normally drew power through an electrified third rail, but while in the Park Avenue Tunnel it used overhead wires. The Central swapped these and other electric locomotives for steam in Harbor, New York. Now this has to be one of the most unique passenger locomotives I've ever seen. This is a Milwaukee Road E2 locomotive. These locomotives were called bipolar because of the special motor used. The motor only had two magnetic poles, hence the bipolar name. These locomotives became one of the symbols of the electrification of the Milwaukee Road and served the railroad from 1919 until the retirement in 1961. We've all seen freight trains, right? But have you ever wondered what it would be like to stand in one of those cars? Well, let's take a walk into a tank car and find out. But first we have to get through these two cabooses, but trust me, this is a really cool view once you get there. This is Chicago and Illinois Midland number 551, a 282 Mikado built in 1928 by the Lima Locomotive Works. In doing my research for this video, I learned that some railroads, including the CNIM, renamed their Mikados MacArthurs for General Douglas MacArthur during World War II, since the name Mikado is Japanese. Speaking of trains being named for generals, this is the Silver Charger, power car for the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy's General Pershing Zephyr. The train was named for World War I General John Pershing because the train's route from Kansas City to St. Louis would pass near his boyhood home. The power car was given the name Silver Charger for his horse, who was named Charger. The train itself ran from its inception in 1939 until the U.S. entered World War II. The power car could be detached from the train and saw service outside of the rest of the train set until being retired in 1966 when it was donated to the museum. Keeping with the World War I theme, this is video taken from the top of the National World War I Memorial in Kansas City, Missouri. I highly recommend this place for anyone who loves history, and if you're a rail fan, you'll get some great shots of the action down below. Let's check this guy out. I got the very bottom of the other one.
Just turns to the left, you can see it all the way back over coming across the bridge.
A minute, I'm not going to take a chance of people knocking my shot over or worse, my phone, but I wanted to get something.
Well, what I'm saying is you can, since the engines are gone, down around there.
That's what I'm doing. I know. After we left the museum, we made our way down to Union Station. This place was amazing. I had never seen anything like it before. It's much more than the train station now, although Amtrak does stop here. It's got a restaurant, movie theater, planetarium, science center, and it can host traveling exhibitions. As cool as all that stuff is, I couldn't help but think about what it was like during the golden age of rail travel, especially when I saw this boys during some of the trains that called here. While in the station, I saw a sign that said, "See real trains here," so of course I had to follow. I was rewarded with this BNSF Intermodal. The first time I've seen BNSF and the first intermodal train for me. Forgive the camera work, I was getting used to a new phone and I was trying to film through a gap in the Wilderness Bridge. Not exactly an easy task. After the train passed, I went back inside to a model railroad display. I'll step back and let you enjoy these like I did.
That's your scale, right?
Hold on.
There's two different trains.
That one really goes over the bridge. The bridge on the other side is wooden, and then this bridge which is black.
Let's see if that one comes around. I don't think so. I think the top one just loops around through the two tunnels, and the bottom one just goes around.
I was trying to record that train, but I had it up to it. Yeah, you can.
That's the Western Auto building you see from up there at the tower.
Yeah, I saw it.
In addition to the models, the room also had logos of various railroads and some excellent artwork as well. As someone who really enjoys railroad history, it was really cool to see this stuff. I highly recommend Union Station. This is a great place for rail fans young and old. Whoops, I almost forgot. Check out this streetcar action in Kansas City. This was pretty cool to see. I did not expect to catch it, but I'm glad I did.
In the background. And a model train in the background.
Wait, no, you can't hear anything. He's gonna have to follow you. The camera's at an angle.
This was a bit of a bonus. I wasn't expecting to do this. We were on our way back. We were in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we were debating whether or not we were going to go see Biltmore. I'd never been. Well, we couldn't get in at a decent time then, so I suggested we go to the North Carolina Museum of Transportation in Spencer, North Carolina, and I won out. So this was a bonus for me, but I'm glad I went. It was really cool to see Spencer. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos down there following the adventures of Norfolk and Western 611, which was down there for the vast majority of last year and part of this year, actually. It was really cool to see the place that I've seen so many pictures from. So enjoyed this bonus that I did not expect to get on this trip. of the museum at Spencer, North Carolina.
Now this is easily one of the coolest things I've ever done, riding on an actual turntable from the steam era. That's the Julian Roundhouse, and it's where most of the rail exhibits are here. We'll be heading back inside for a look once we get our track aligned right.
There's just a pit.
The first locomotive we see is Southern Railway number 542. This locomotive was built for the Southern by Baldwin in 1903 and was leased to the Atlantic and Yadkin Railway on two separate occasions in the 1930s and 50s. The locomotive was returned to the Southern when the A&Y ceased operations in 1950. For the rest of its career, it was used here at Spencer on yard jobs until it was retired in 1953. It came back to Spencer in 1991 after being traded for another locomotive, Illinois Central number 1894. One of my favorite YouTube channels is Distant Signal. Danny Harmon does a great job, and through his rail fan adventures in Florida, I've come to learn a lot more about the Seaboard Airline and the Atlantic Coast Line. Until now, I'd never seen anything from either railroad, and I have to say, it's really cool to see equipment from what became a half of CSX. We'll start with the Seaboard. This is Seaboard Airline number 544. 544 is a 210L decapod and was built in 1918 for the Russian State Railroad, but was never delivered due to the Russian Revolution. It then became property of the U.S. Railroad Association after World War I when it was placed into service on the Seaboard, where it served until being transferred to subsidiary Gainesville Midland in the 50s and finally was retired in the 1960s. And what would any steam-powered train be without a caboose? I don't know a whole lot about this one, but I do know it's really cool to see that old Seaboard logo. Moving on to the ACL. This is Atlantic Coast Line number 1031. A 460 built in 1913 by Baldwin. She found use all up and down the East Coast on the ACL until being transferred to subsidiaries once the railroad began to dieselize. She served her final years on various lines in North Carolina before being placed on display in 1959 and taking up residence here at Spencer in 1994. For whatever reason, it's hard for me to visualize the SAL and ACL having steam locomotives, so this is what I think of when I think of the coastline. This is ACL number 501, an EMD E3 built in 1939. She racked up more than 6 million miles until her retirement in 1970, making her the most traveled E-unit ever in the US. Hey, wait a minute. That doesn't look like the Norfolk Southern I know. That's because it isn't. This is a Norfolk Southern locomotive, but it was from the original Norfolk Southern, which went from Norfolk, Virginia to Charlotte, North Carolina. This version of NS was acquired by the Southern in 1974. The NS we all know was formed in 1982 when the Southern merged with the Norfolk and Western. Would you believe me if I told you this locomotive was involved in a deadly accident and had its nose crushed? Well, it's true. Southern's number 6900 started life with Southern number 2923 in September 1951. Come November though, she would be involved in an accident that injured 68 and killed 18. What happened? Well, this locomotive was pulling train number 48, the northbound Southerner, in Woodstock, Alabama, and was ordered into a siding to allow train number 47, the southbound Southerner, and another train number 47, a detour Crescent, to pass. The Southerner passed without incident, but despite all warnings of the oncoming Crescent, including a red signal, warning from the southbound Southerner there was another train behind them, and the fireman pointing out the red signal, the engineer pulled the northbound train out onto the main line about 100 feet. And when the Crescent came around the curve, nothing could be done to stop an accident. The engineer lost his life due to that decision. The engine was repaired and placed back into service. When the Southerner and Crescent lines were combined, she was given a new number that she still wears today, number 6900. Look at her now and you'd never know she was in a major accident just months into her career. Speaking of the Southern, chances are when you think of a Southern Railway diesel, it looks something like this. This is Southern number 2601, a high-hood GP30 built in 1963 by EMD. The Southern, along with Norfolk and Western, were the only railroads to order these locomotives with that high hood, thus giving their locomotives the nickname High Hoods. Most of these workhorses were off the roster by the early 1990s. Now sometimes you'll get something completely unexpected that really just makes your day. This is it for me. First of all, it was really cool to see a steam locomotive being worked on at a roundhouse. Second, it's really cool for me to know who that is working on it. That's Barney Grambling of the Grambling Locomotive Works. How do I know that? Because he and his dad had their own TV show about taking their locomotives around the country. It's called Had Steam Engine, Will Travel, and I highly recommend it. The locomotive itself is General Coal No. 85, an old four-rail built in 1928 by the Vulcan Iron Works for the A.E. Dick Construction Company in Pennsylvania. It was used in their stone quarry until it was sold to Jeddah in 1933, and then sold to a collector in 1954. I can't find when the Grambling sucker in, but thank goodness they did. We've shown trains named for generals, and trains filmed from a war museum. But here's something that's actually been in a war. This is a U.S. Army hospital car. It was used to take wounded soldiers from the front to hospitals, and when you step inside, it's hard not to think of the men who were in here, not knowing if they would live or die. Moving on. This is a mail car. Why am I showing this? Well, number one, it's cool. Mail contracts were the backbone of many a passenger train and in many cases kept trains profitable. More specific to Spencer, the town was the destination of what may be the most famous mail train ever. In the early 1900s, the Southern won a contract from Congress to carry mail from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta. One stipulation of this contract was that for every minute the train was late, the railroad would be fined heavily. In September 1903, engineer Steve Brody took command of train number 97 with engine number 1102 out of Monroe, Virginia. The train had been held up in Washington and was an hour late, so Brody was trying to make up time. On their way to the next crew change here at Spencer, they were to descend a 3-mile grade. At the bottom of that grade was a curve leading to a trestle. The speed at which the train was going took them straight off the rails and into a ravine, killing 11 of the 17 on board, including engineer Brody. As sad as it is, a train wreck that killed 11 people wasn't all that notable, and would simply have been passed down into history had it not been for a famous song by Vernon Dalhart. That song became the first recording ever to sell 1 million copies and in doing so immortalized the train. That song, The Wreck of the Old 97. You have to wonder if we'd even know Brody's name or about the contract Southern had won if the train had made it here to Spencer. To close our video, we'll show this set of old signals and grade crossings. I personally thought it was really cool to see a wigwag for myself. After leaving the museum, we had a clear signal home, so we highballed back to West Virginia.
Well, I really enjoyed this trip. I really did. It was fun to get out, especially after the last year with not going much of anywhere. It was really fun to get out and see other parts of the country I've never seen before. And it was cool for me to see other railroads in action, like that BNSF train in Kansas City. That was really cool. Actually, the 2 BNSF trains in Kansas City. But it was really, really cool for me to see. And it was really cool to see these museums. I, as someone who really loves railroad history, really appreciated that. So please don't forget to like the video if you liked it. Leave a comment down below if you feel so inclined. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Hit the bell to be notified when a new video is posted, just like this one. Until then, this is Lucas Berry for White Oak Rail. Stay safe, everyone.